everybody. Welcome to the Underwater Photography Show. I am Matthew Sullivan.
And I'm Alex Mustard.
And as you saw in our previous episode on the MFO3, I am not in my normal spot, so just bear with me with this white-ish wall for the next couple episodes. And when I'm back in Florida, it'll be all back to normal. But today we are talking about something that I am excited about. I have not gotten to shoot these yet. Hopefully at some point I will. But I know, Alex, you've been shooting them extensively, and that is the Retra Pro Max II, which is Retra's, I'm reading this off their website, their fifth generation underwater strobe. And real quick spec list before we get going here. 65% more light output, 25% faster recycle time, 120% brighter pilot LED, and it is in the exact same body as the original Pro Max, so it's not any bigger. And then they quote 190 watt seconds, still uses AA batteries, 4900K color temperature, the leak detection, back panel, all that good stuff, HSS, 300 shots at full power, 1,000 plus at half power, and on and on and on and on and on. But those are the important ones. But you have actually
price? Do they give a percentage increase on price, or just
there's also the price, which is cringeworthy. It is, I think, $18.99 for a single strobe. So I will never buy a pair of these.
Is that US dollars?
That's US dollars. So
because obviously the exchange rates have also changed. I mean, as well as the tariffs and everything. It's really yeah.
You've shot them in the field. That's what really matters. So what did you think of them? Especially, so a couple things. As a standalone product, and then with regards to whether it's worth the upgrade for people who have the Pro Maxes, the original Pro Max, how you felt about all that. And then obviously I know you have some cool pictures to share with us as well. So maybe the pictures alone will convince some people that they need to upgrade.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's not necessarily my intention. Is that I think, first of all, there's an element of another new strobe from Retra. And I think Retra have an attitude a little bit like with iPhones, is that when they can think of ways to make substantial improvements to their products, and because they make their products in relatively small hand-built runs, when they've run out of a particular set of gear, they're in a very good position to make an upgrade. So, anyone who imagines this is the last Retra they'll ever be, is silly. But I think when they've got substantial upgrades, I think, it makes sense for them to do it, because, it's basically the same as they could build another load of Pro Maxes, or they can make a whole load of Pro Max 2s. That said, it's not been a rushed job in any way, and they've been working on these improvements because in many ways, I think, certainly in terms of light, this is the biggest change to Retra's flash output since the original Pro came along. And that's because once the original Pro came along, every generation after that, so the Pro X and then the Pro Max, they were all kind of standardized so that you could use them all interchangeably. And the light was identical. The power was identical. The beam was identical. And this is the first one where they've gone, okay, we've got the capability now to take this up a notch. So let's turn up the power a notch. And it's really, you went through the percentage, but, it's quite a significant gain in power. They were already one of the most powerful strobes. They're now right up there, standing on the front line with the most powerful strobes I've tested are the Batscatter HF1s. I've tested them against everything that claims to be as powerful or more powerful, and they're not. The HF1s are the strongest. The Retra's own Maxi, which is not out yet, so I don't recount it just yet, is slightly more powerful than the HF1, but slightly is the right word. And so, I tried them against those, and I'll show you some pictures in a bit. But they've really turned the power up. Whether you need that power, I think is something that's important to consider. These strobes are all very, very powerful these days. You really don't need that power. The thing that I think is important to say that about the power on the Pro Max 2 that really impressed me was that, yes, it's got this extra power, but the recycle time is very impressive when using that power. And the AA batteries are able to cope with it absolutely fine. Yes, they don't recycle as instantaneously as lithiums, but they're not far off. How much do you need to go digga 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 digga? You can just go dig 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 instead. It's not a big deal. And I think that just because there's a spec difference between what a lithium battery can do and a AA can do. I think, you shouldn't necessarily get carried away by that difference, because in real world terms, I think the AAs have many advantages. Yes, these batteries are taking, if you use them with the boosters on, you're putting 8 batteries in each. So you've got 16 batteries on the go at any one time, which means most people will be going on trips with 32 batteries. It's a lot of AAs to take as opposed to taking, 4 or 8 lithiums. But AA batteries are very travel friendly. You can throw them in your whole bags, and that's allowed by all the airlines. Lithium batteries have increasingly tight restrictions on them, and who knows what the future will bring. And the other advantage of AAs, of course, is you have problems in the field. Sourcing more AAs is usually very straightforward. Sourcing specific lithium batteries currently can be quite tricky, depending on who you're diving with and that sort of thing. Yep. And I think for those are the reasons why Retra have chosen to stay with AAs. I, at times, really enjoy the advantages of lithiums, and at times I really enjoy the advantages of AAs. I think as long as you're responsible as a lithium owner, in that you don't let if your batteries start to get old and beaten up, you replace them. You don't go out and buy the cheapest ones you can find. You buy quality brands from quality battery stores, and you use quality chargers. I don't think in any way you're being irresponsible with them. And what I say on my workshops with the lithium batteries is, because they last all day in most of the cameras, charge them at lunchtime when everyone's awake. Put them in the strobes for the afternoon dives, leave them in overnight, do the morning dives, charge them at lunchtime the next day. And then you're not charging them at night on a liveaboard or in a resort when people aren't paying attention. And I think that works very well for people. Anyway, that's enough on the batteries. The thing that was interesting about these strobes is really that they've got very good recycling times. They've got even more power. And they have changed the beam a little bit with that. So I was keen to see how their quality of light was. Because one of the things that Retra has concentrated on since they've begun is producing really wide, soft, even light. Not just bright in the middle, which gets you the highest guide number, but actually to make that beam spread. And it's actually how bright it is get my hands in the right place, in this part of the picture, not just this part, that really matters in terms of giving you soft light. Soft light means you light your subjects without obvious highlights, without obvious dark, big, strong shadow areas, which generally is much more complementary and much more natural looking on subject. The other advantage of wide, soft beam strobes is if your strobe aim is slightly off, you don't see it. If you have narrow beam strobes, you can achieve the same lighting effect, but it takes twice as long fiddling around getting the aim exactly right to really make the subject pop to the same degree. And one of the reasons, that Retra strobes have done so well amongst the serious photographers out there, and certainly, I would say a huge proportion of the serious underwater photographers who do a lot of wide angle are shooting Retra strobes now, is because people see the difference it makes to their pictures. They do 1 or 2 dives with them and they just go, oh yes, I see how much easier this is. How much easier it is for me to get that high quality of light. So I was curious because Retra have changed their beam slightly for this generation because of the extra power. They've made the light throw a little bit more, so it's a little bit more directional than the previous versions. So the first tests I wanted to do with them was to really see if they still had a good quality of light. And I'm pleased to report, I'll bring the pictures up. I'm pleased to report that they really did. This was one of the very first pictures I took with them on the first dive of the trip. And I just swam over to the hard coral and took a hard coral fisheye scenic. Oh no, this is WACP, I think. But a wide angle scenic shot of the coral. And I was very happy that they still give that nice, pleasing, easy to use illumination. But with that slightly tighter beam, they're able to throw the light further. And then also with the extra power, that throwing of the light, I think, makes more sense. I think if they kept them so diffuse, they wouldn't have got such a impressive amount of light when it comes to distant subjects.
So am I understanding you correctly that the beam on the original Pro Max will be slightly wider overall, but the Pro Max 2 will be able to cast it further out into the water?
Yes, I have to say that, I know it's not to put anyone down, probably 95 to 99% of users wouldn't spot the difference.
Yeah, of course.
It's a very subtle difference.
Yeah.
But they've done that to make more use of the extra power. So they really throw the light that little bit further. And obviously, if you add, stronger diffusers, you can get back to the same place very, very quickly with really very little loss of light.
Yeah.
But I think that most of the time with the Retra strobes, you don't need to use diffusers with them for wide angle. And then if you do, I took a lot of these using their weakest diffuser, which I think they call the soft. But I can't never remember the names of their diffusers. But it's the weakest one. But I was very pleased with the quality of the light and also the quality of the colors. I think that they have an ability to really bring out all the colors in a shot, not just certain colors, which I'm always really impressed with the strobes. So these are just some wide angle pictures I'm clicking through. The sunset splits are a real challenge for strobe power and coverage because it's quite hard to get a nice natural looking illumination on the reef, particularly the bigger the area you try and illuminate in a sunset split below the surface. And I was very impressed with them for that. And yeah, these are some of the goatfish. And just being able to light up big scenes like this really easily. A few times I used them on full power, but most of the time I was at between, I use 37 a lot, 50 a lot, but rarely needed to go more than that. So I had, pretty much instant recycle the whole time. And that power was there when I needed it. For, when you do the close focus shots, come on to the triggerfish. This is a very close focus shot. This is shot with EMWL. And the light, when you're really that close to subjects, it's not easy to light them soft and evenly. And I was very impressed by the quality of light in this picture here. Another thing that's never talked about with the Retra, actually, color temperature. And on most strobes, as you turn the power up, the color temperature gets bluer. Because as you try and push more power out of the strobe, it shifts in color temperature. And Retra have spent a huge amount of time making sure that their strobes stay as warm at high power as they are on low power. So lots of strobe manufacturers go, our strobe isn't that cold, and they measure the color temperature when it's on very low power and it's reasonably warm. And then when you turn it up to high power, it gets colder and colder and colder. And warm light can be very flattering on underwater subjects. And when white balanced to warm light, you get very nice blues in the background. And so I'm very happy with both the color rendition and the color temperature of the strobes. And then I was going to show you some tests on power. So whenever I have strobes to test, I just do some tests for myself to understand what the power is. And this is a test between the Retra Pro Max II, and this is just a pillow on the liverboard. It's not a fancy studio setup, but my housing was sitting on the bench on the sofa here, and I held the strobe directly above the port and took a picture. The exposure here, but it doesn't really matter, was at ISO 50, so low ISO, and at f25, so shut right down. So you need a lot of light to light this up. And this picture here is with the Pro Max II on full power. It gives a correct exposure. The strongest strobe I've ever tried is the Backscatter HF1. I'm going to show you the Backscatter HF1, not at full power, but above full power on the HF1. They have a +1 and a +2 mode. This picture is the Backscatter HF1 on +1. And it's not as bright. So this strobe has got real power. Now, just to tell you about the setup here, I'm testing these as I would shoot them. So with the HF1, the light is pretty ugly without a diffuser on. So I've got the flat diffuser, not their dome diffuser, just the flat diffuser on here. And with the warming in it as well, because the light is horribly cold and you would never use it like that. So this is about a real world test. And then that's the HF1 on +2 power. So I think on +2 power, it's maybe slightly brighter than the aim of the strobes is slightly different between the two because they're just handheld. It's slightly brighter than the Retra, but they're very, very close. So I would say the HF1 is still slightly brighter, but you're talking about a strobe that's almost as bright as the HF1 on +2. And you can't shoot the HF1 on +2 continuously because it overheats and starts beeping at you. That's why it's not marked as full power. It's marked as when you really need it, turn it up to these levels, but you can't keep shooting at these levels power. So very, very impressive power output, without a doubt. I'm just going to show you some different, I do these tests for me. I wouldn't normally show them on the channel, but I was just really impressed by this level of power from that small little strobe. one important factor when you have lots and lots of power in a strobe is you need to have lots of power settings. And I think this is something the HF1 got wrong. And it's probably my only criticism of the HF1 is you can't turn the strobe down enough. So this is a super macro shot taken with a pair of Retra strobes. For this shot, I had my ISO on ISO 100, so low ISO, and my aperture shut to f16. So it's not an open aperture shot. It's not a high ISO shot. I had the Retra strobes at 1% power. So they were all the way down at 1% power to get the correct exposure for this picture. The HF1s, you can't turn them down anywhere near that much. And that's why when I've said, if you shoot macro with HF1s, there are times where they're just too bright. And that's something I think is really important, is as we see more and more strobes coming out with more power, it's important that those manufacturers also give us the ability to turn them down more. Because, each time you're turning, a couple of clicks, you're going down a stop. But if you're at a higher stop to begin with, you need to come down a long way. These are some more tests. And I didn't do a back-to-back test of the new Retra against the old Retra. The new Pro Max II against the Pro Max I. But this is a series of test shots, very similar test shots to the other ones, but done on a previous liveaboard trip, comparing the HF1, which is this shot, with the Pro Max one. And that's the Pro Max one. And you can see quite a big jump in exposure, that the HF1 is really quite a bit brighter. And then I've actually also got here the Marolux strobe, the Marolux Apollo 3, all shot on full power. And that's the Marolux, which is as bright as the Retra in the middle. But if you look at the top of the picture, that's the Retra, and that's the Marolux. You can see how much more directional the light is from the Marolux. And that's with the diffuser on it, the dome diffuser on it. I also find that both the backscatter and the Marolux strobes are much more yellow light. And I think there's much more red in the Retra strobe, which I think really is one of the reasons why I always say I really like the colours the Retra gives me. And I think it's that balance. But that's a very subjective opinion, on the colour temperature. But hopefully that gives people a feeling of the power. These things lack very little compared to the most powerful strobe I've ever tried in underwater photography, if that. And I think have a better quality of light at the same time to begin with. So I'm just going to show a few more pictures with them. I think they're very pleasing to shoot. This is just a scorpionfish inside a cave, close focus, wide angle, nice pleasing quality of light. I felt that the slightly tighter angle of view of the light was a little bit better in murky environments like the Thistlegorm for getting cleaner images without backscatter. You're just not quite spraying the light around as much. And I took this shot without diffusers on. I didn't put beam restrictors on because actually I forgot to bring them on the trip, because I thought that my beam restrictors were on some my Pro Maxes, which I'd lent to a friend. So I thought they were in his luggage, but they weren't. So that's why I didn't have them, because he had them and I thought he was bringing them on the trip, and then he didn't bring them. So so I shot this without the beam restrictors. But it's nice, clean light. The light is also, you're able to, adjust it and create different effects. So this is a moray eel shot with backlighting with a fisheye. So the light isn't really behind it. It's kind of, very sort of extreme edge lighting, really, just to create kind of a more moody atmospheric image of the moray. Shot with the EMWL as well, this one. And then just a little bit more wide angle reef scenery with the corals, showing that they light things up very nicely. So that's pretty much all I had on them. So I haven't answered the first question you asked me, which is who should buy them. That, for me, these are my standout underwater strobes. And they're certainly what I intend to use, whenever I can for my own photography going forwards. They're not day and night different from their previous generation, but they do have slightly more power if you ever need it. They have more power settings than the previous generation, and they have good recycling and good battery life. All of which make them very attractive, while still not being a huge, great package. They're a nice small package to travel with. The thing that I've said many times on the channel that I like about Retra is that if you're doing a macro trip, or a cold water trip where you don't need loads of high power, you take just 4 batteries for each of them, because they'll last all day anyway with 4 batteries. And then if you're doing a bright conditions, big scene, wide angle trip, you take 8 batteries. And I like the fact that they can be big and small, lighter and heavier, depending on the trips you're doing with them. I think as a big animal strobe, they're better than the Pro Maxes because they do throw the light a little bit further. I think that they do take ever so slightly more care to aim them because they are. But I would say that if you do have them, I'd buy some. And you're going to do a lot of close focus wide angle, I'd probably use them always with diffusers on for that, and you won't notice any difference from the previous generation of Retras then. I think I didn't use strong diffusers on them because I wanted to see how they were. And I was very happy with the light. So overall, I really like them. If you are a current Pro Max user, I really don't think you should be upgrading to them. Yes, they are better, but they're not worth, all the money unless someone's going to give you an amazing deal on your current Pro Maxes. There's no point in upgrading for a little bit more strobe power, a little bit better battery life, a little bit more strobe throw, and that sort of thing. If you, though, are a Retra user on the older Pros strobes, you will be shocked by how much better the battery life is on these. It is shocking compared to the original Pros. It's just crazy how fast they recycle, how long the batteries last. You think, how can they have more light output and the batteries last so much longer? It's ridiculous compared to the original Pros. I think that also compared to the original Pros, the booster installation is much neater than the more add-on battery. If you are sitting on the fence about them, it wouldn't, I don't think it's in their plans, but it wouldn't shock me if in the future the front end of this strobe got put into the yet to be released Maxi. So you could have this front end being driven by lithium strobe batteries.
Yeah.
So the Maxi is out and out power, fast recycling, that sort of thing. I could see them making a combination of the two. Whether they will or not, I don't know. I don't have any insider information. I think they're going to have their plate pretty full for the next year, making Maxes and making Pro Max 2s. So I don't think there's going to be anything happening on that front. But, you might think, oh, can I have a bit of that and a bit of this? And I can't see it being impossible for them to do. So that could happen. As to whether you come to these from other brands, that really depends, what you want. For me, I've been joking for a while that Retra has been the worst thing for my underwater photography because everyone has now got really good light in their pictures. And that was something that used to differentiate my work from other people. And now everyone has nice light and it's bad for me. So yeah, don't go and buy them on my word. But yeah, they definitely fulfill the bill. I would also imagine that there will be a number of Retra users thinking, oh, I quite fancy one of these or a pair of these to go forward. And there could well be some good deals on older Retras on the second-hand market.
Yeah.
So, but overall, I was very impressed with them. They are definitely my number one choice for strobes at the moment. It's such a dynamic market on the strobe front that there are strobes coming out all the time. So, as of now, the 9th of July, 2025, this is where I would say are my favorite strobes for the reasons that I've laid out. So,
well, that's a good endorsement for them. Although, like you said, don't buy them on your word because you don't want everybody having the same light. But yeah, Retra's made the original Pro Max was one of my favorite strobes ever. I imagine the Pro Max 2 is, whenever I get to shoot it, will be as well. So thank you guys for watching, and we will be back soon with another episode of the Underwater Photography Show.